Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 934th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Sunil Gupta and Ksenia M. Soboleva. We're thrilled to welcome poet Teline Trần here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place and of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Over a career spanning more than 4 decades, Sunil Gupta has maintained a visionary approach to photography, producing a body of work that has pioneered a unique social and political commentary. The artist's diasporic experience of multiple cultures informs a practice dedicated to themes of race, migration, and queer identity. His work is in many public collections, including MoMA's, Tate's, the Philadelphia Museum of Arts, and many others. In 1989, Gupta co-founded Autograph, the Association of Black Photographers, and a few years later, he participated in the birth of the Organization for Visual Arts, aimed to promote a better understanding of culturally diverse visual arts practices. And our host today, New York-based writer and art historian, Dr. Ksenia M. Soboleva, specializes in queer art and culture. She holds a PhD from the Institute of Fine Arts at NYU, and her writings have appeared in the Brooklyn Rail, Bomb Magazine, Hyperallergic, Art Agenda, and various exhibition catalogs. She has curated exhibitions at Candace Mady Gallery, La Mama Galleria, and Assembly Room. She is currently the Andrew W. Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow in Gender and LGBTQ+ History at the New York Historical Society. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Ksenia.
Thank you so much, Chloe, and thank you to everyone at the Brooklyn Rail, not just for this conversation, but for continuing to be a platform that holds space for community and critical engagement. And thank you to Sunil for joining me today. Sunil, you and I first met in London in 2018 when I was researching Tessa Boffin, who was a close friend of yours. And I love that our paths keep crossing today virtually. So it's really nice to see you. Thank you. And congratulations on your 3rd solo show at Hales Gallery, the new Pre-Raphaelites, which is a body of work from 2008 that centers around LGBTQ+ rights in India. And as I understand it, it was made in response to Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, which was a 19th century law criminalizing homosexuality. And it was reversed in 2009, so a year after you made this body of work. And all of the work of yours that I know is queer visibility is really at the core of it, whether it's through self-portraiture or portraits of others, whether it's capturing queer couples being intimate or a solitary queer person with their back turned to the camera. And I would love to talk today about your journey as a photographer, both literally, you know, you moved from Montreal to New York, to London, to Delhi, but also conceptually. But I want to start with the show that's on view now, so the new Pre-Raphaelites, and the starting point for, actually we can go to the slideshow, sorry. The starting point for each of these photographs was a Pre-Raphaelite painting. And I'm curious to hear what made you turn to the Pre-Raphaelites in the first place.
Well, thank you very much, Ksenia, for inviting me today. And diving straight into this series, it was a chance encounter. Many things that I do are the result of chance encounters. MAs and PhDs notwithstanding. Anyway, I was visiting London, actually, from Delhi. I reversed this way of living in 2005 by moving to live in Delhi. And so in Delhi, I found both my favorite things, homosexuality and photography, were really lagging behind. They seem to have missed gay liberation, and they seem to have missed photography as well. Anyway, so I was very fortunate that I, through my photography, by having an exhibition, was introduced to actually a local campus queer group who were actioning monthly programs of screenings of queer material to generate a discussion in a more like a campus setting. And I met them just when they were thinking of moving themselves off campus and into the city. Naturally, they were all very young, but they were very keen on befriending me, and they persuaded me to join them, even though I was much older than their parents, I think. I remember going to people's 20th birthday parties. Actually, the worst thing was sitting on the floor, which is something I find really impossible now. Or once I'm down on the floor, I can't get up again. Anyway, so these people and I got involved in some enabling some queer cultural activity to happen in town and running little workshops. And this was a new generation for me. I hadn't really met young people like that in India before. My generation and the one immediately after it was pretty traditional and really didn't see the point of activism or gay activism because they didn't think anything would change, so that the line was something like, oh, well, this is a very old culture. We're 5,000 years old, nothing's going to change, why bother? Also, whoever would stick their head up and wave a flag for gay lib would probably get shot down, and nobody wanted to be the first martyr there. But I found this generation who were all born, mind you, after the early 90s economic liberalization of India, who were growing up and coming out into graduating into a very different world of economic possibilities. And they wanted change, and they were impatient, and they were tired of the Indian hypocrisy. So, so India got rid of the British colonizers back in 1947, but they were clinging on to a Victorian morality which had been instituted in the Indian ruling class by the Victorians way back in the 19th century. And they had left us this law 377, which, by the way, is the same section number across the former British Empire. And it appears in Uganda and Southeast Asia and various places. In fact, there's going to be a show in Singapore about 377, but they still have it. Anyway, so this young cohort of people were also involved in a local and a national strategy to try to bring a case to the Indian law courts to unseat the law. And so that was also happening on the side. And I would run photography workshops with them. They were basically using video, moving image for their programming because it was easy to get a hold of, easy to download. People could send it to you. And but so I introduced some photography into the scene and started with running workshops just for this group of people, which was great. They came to appreciate it. They didn't mind it being risky. I said, oh, well, come back with a nude selfie, which they did, which was, I was surprised. Anyway, So these are the people, by the way, who would now appear in these pictures as my models. So that's one part of the story, is that I often work with, I don't work with professionals. I often work with the people around me and people that I kind of know in some way. This person was the curator of my show, actually. So she was ready to go naked, but I thought maybe not for India. I was also making this work to be shown in India, so there were certain boundaries that were difficult to cross. Anyway, so I haven't answered your question yet, I know, so I'm going to answer it now, finally. So I'm visiting London from Delhi, with some time on my hands. I keep coming back to London because I need HIV treatment. That was really the reason. Anyway, so then I wandered into what's now the Tate Britain, and I wandered into a rehang or a special showing of the Pre-Raphaelite collection. And the Pre-Raphaelites are a group of painters who are very well known. And I think a lot of us think, oh, well, we kind of know them because they're like so basic, it's like elementary first year art school or something. But I don't know if many of us, and I certainly hadn't had a close encounter with them, or if I had been to a show, I kind of walked past them thinking, oh yeah, that's the old Pre-Raphaelites. But because I had time, I looked at them more closely, and I began to see things in them, things like amazing detail, color, and an atmosphere of youngish people who were kind of sexually experimenting, and they reminded me of my young activist friends back home in Delhi. And so this stuck in my mind. I bought the catalog, and carried it back with me, and didn't do much with it for a while. And then the kind of actual trigger became an exhibition that happened at the Alliance Française Gallery in Delhi, for which I had no work to put up. I'm sure this happens to other people. People call you up and say, especially in India, everything happens like tomorrow. So they call and say, we're opening on Monday, do you have something? And I'm saying, no, I don't think so. It's like in 2 days' time. And so they said, okay, but we made a space for you. So then I have this space and nothing to put up in it. So I offered to create a photographic studio in my space, basically put up a backdrop, and just shoot people who'd come for the opening who were willing to be photographed. And so I did that. And after the opening, I put up one of the pictures from the results of that shoot. And this was a picture which actually, unfortunately, I had to remove from the series because the model in that case was not someone I knew very well and actually didn't want to be publicly on display so much. But before he did that, it was a man in a sari. So I'll show you what I did instead as a copy of it. It's on the slides here. So anyway, so I had this one picture, and somehow either I sent it or showed it somehow to Autograph in London. We mentioned this place Autograph earlier. It's a kind of lobbying organization for Black photographers in London, which we've had since the 80s. Now run by a very energetic person called Mark Seeley. And I've known Mark for a very long time. And there are occasions when Autograph in the shape of Mark Seeley has stepped forward and offered me a little carrot. So Mark said he really liked that picture. But with photography, you can't have a single picture. You got to have a series. He said, is there a series? And I said, well, if there's money, there'll be a series. And so he said, okay, I'll give you 1,000 pounds. You will make series of at least 10 of these things. So I said, okay. And I said, what am I going to do? And I thought, right, I'm going to do the Pre-Raphaelites. I'm looking at this catalog and thinking, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. So the first 10 pictures were made as a collection to satisfy autograph and Mark Seeley, because I'd signed a piece of paper saying I will make 10 such pictures in 3 months' time, and I had to do something. I had a deadline, so something had to be made. So that's kind of how it was born. And basically what we did was I tried to emulate some of the paintings. Sometimes I tried to emulate the mood rather than the actual painting. This one we're looking at is a head. The Pre-Raphaelites have a number of heads, and I meant to do several heads, but I never got there in the end. My life in Delhi was really chaotic. I mean, it still is. So it's amazing anything gets done work-wise. Oh yeah, this is the one which was something like this was the original one.
I love this one.
But yeah, in fact, I prefer this one now to the original one because this character comes from an underclass in Delhi, and they're called Kothis and Hijras, and basically they're thought of as victims in many ways. You know, they're the most vulnerable people on the street. They're the ones who get attacked. When that's what foreign media think Indian gays look like. They're the ones they want to shoot and all of that. So they're victimized in many ways. But I quite like the power and the strength that this person is giving out. And the great thing was that this person used to go out with somebody who I managed to steal from him, who's now become my husband. So there was a little aside there. Footnote, Ksenia. Yeah, so photographs, a lot of stories behind them.
Wait, is that how you met your husband? It's for this series?
Well, I asked him actually. I thought I'll take him home and ask him to take his clothes off for the camera. And he said, no, but I have a friend who won't take his clothes off, but you could, you know, we could dress him up. So yeah, so I got the friend. And then of course I had to show him the picture. I said, you have to come and see the picture, don't you? And yeah, I lured him back somehow.
I think about that a lot, actually. As an artist and a photographer, you can ask someone, you know, that you want to flirt with to come and sit for you. And as a writer, I'm like, what am I going to do? Ask someone to sit for me while I write a poem about them?
No, you got to read your poem. You got to read to them. You know, you put light a candle and get some nice wine out and read in your sultry voice to them.
I will try it out, Sunil. I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was so well narrated. And you know, it's actually funny because I remember that the very first painting that I ever cried in front of, I was 11 years old, I think. And it was Millet's Ophelia. It was at the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, my mother. And I was not expecting to cry, and I was standing in front of this work, and you know, I was like an emo teenager with a lot of repressed sexual desires, and I remember looking at it, and it wasn't her death that moved me, it was that she seemed so alive, and I just started crying. And so I was thinking about that as I was looking at these photographs. You
know, I think that that painting, that Ophelia, which is what this resembles more than Pre-Raphaelites, is so embedded around the globe. It's traveled so widely that when I showed that first picture to people, there was a very positive reaction to it. You know, in Delhi, where people would probably not be aware of Pre-Raphaelites and Millet and all that, but they somehow, they'd obviously seen it somewhere along the way and taken a shine to it, because it got a very positive response in non-European spaces. Yeah.
And I think your intimacy to the subject is really conveyed in the photographs, and that was going to be something that I was going to ask you, but you already answered it. I'm wondering if actually,
yeah,
there's your husband.
yeah.
And maybe now we can just go to the Christopher Street series briefly, because I want to go back a little bit, because, well, firstly, I saw this series when it was exhibited at Hales, and I wrote about it. And if I'm not mistaken, 1976, this was your first series as a practicing artist, because you originally moved to New York to get an MBA, right?
That's right, yeah.
And then how did you switch to photography?
Well, first of all, the MBA was really boring. I was doing finance. I don't know why, and I had to follow one of my tasks of the day was to follow the stock market in the Wall Street Journal. It was terrible. I had to sit there with a foot ruler and a magnifying glass, studying stock prices, and I had to escape from that. And I did photography as a hobby, and so that's what took me out on the streets with the camera, was to get away from the stock market figures. And then I think I had an interest in photography anyway, and New York was the first city I'd lived in where there was so much photography on show all the time. You know, the other places I'd lived in, Montreal and Delhi, had no photography galleries, no photography in the museums. They basically only had painting and sculpture. And then suddenly there it was in New York, it was on the walls everywhere. All this stuff I'd only seen in books. I was trying to teach myself through books. And then, so I used to hang out in the gallery, especially Whitkin, which used to be on 57. And then I decided I'll ditch my MBA classes altogether. And I enrolled in the new school for some classes with Lisette Model and Philippe Holzman, who did wonderful lighting classes in his apartment in that wonderful building, and with George Tice about printing. And they were all wonderful, obsessive, eccentric people. And I just fell in love with them and the medium, and I got a really positive response from Lisette. I think I was very lucky because she was a woman of extreme, you know, like she loved it or she hated it, you know. She'd go say, darling, go try again. She didn't like it. Something you cannot say nowadays, can you, to your students? Otherwise they'll fire you. I wish I could say that to some of them. Anyway, so, but she quite liked, I think she liked me because I was Indian and I had slightly slanty eyes, because she was following Krishnamurti. I think that was in my favor. I was Asian, you know, I kind of had that. Most other people in New York thought I was Puerto Rican and crossed the street when they saw me in case I mugged them. But she was very positive. So, yeah, and so then through the class, I would meet people from other students, and then from my little bit of going out as a gay man to Julius's and places like that. In the village, I would meet other gay men who were in the business of photography. I met a wonderful gay guy who was a buyer of photography. And I was amazed there was such even an occupation, which meant we went to all the auctions. He took me along, and we could handle the material. And he would buy stuff for people in Texas, and you know, so very quickly I was kind of just pulled into the whole thing. I mean, he took me to meet Diane Arbus' printer and all of that, you know. So I had very intimate, with no prior training or information. I was just like plunged into this. Before this, all I'd seen was the Time Life series of books on how to take a good picture. And so that was how it kind of got going. And that was, I just hadn't yet told my parents, who were still paying for the MBA. So that was a little tricky financial situation I put myself into. But eventually they found out and I had to leave. So yeah, but I did it for a year.
And I always think of these as you really using the camera as a tool for cruising.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting, and I think I said this when I wrote about these, is that the growing visibility of gay men in the early 1970s, you know, post Stonewall, coalesced with the growing reputation of photography in the art world.
It seemed like it's both the, I've never seen so many gay men or so many photography galleries in one place.
Yeah.
And
how did, sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah.
I was going to ask, how did being in New York at this time shape your queer identity, and then also after this moving to London, and then being in London for, you know, Section 28, which was what, 1988?
Yeah.
Which is another law.
Yeah. So, well, being in New York was very exciting. First of all, there were so many gay men and not enough time, as that song used to say. And so instead of having, I could have everyone, but I could have them through the camera. So that's what I did. New York was really fun. It was really rough. You know, there were garbage strikes and it was kind of run down. I lived in London Terrace. I could walk everywhere. You know, people were scared of me. It was a scary time. Things happened. You know, and I had a bike. It got stolen, and the kids had it in the park on, I don't know, somewhere around 18th Street. And the cop said, "I can see it in the park, but I don't think we should go after it. I don't think I want to go after it either." Because the kids would do anything. Anyway, so it was that kind of place as well. And it was just, I just never been in a city where you had a feeling like anything was possible and everything was happening. So when I left, by then I had made some New York friends. They said, "Why are you leaving? Anything worth anything would come to New York City. We just stay here. It all comes to you." So they didn't plan on ever leaving Manhattan. So anyway, so I went to London, which seemed like a real downer. Everything was wrong with it. There were no out gay men. Everybody was in hiding. The British police were busy arresting everybody for cruising. They called it soliciting. They found this law which kind of equated cruising to prostitution. And it became easy pickings, you know. So in the evening, when the London cops didn't have enough arrests in their books, they would just go out, pretend to be gay, and arrest guys trying to pick them up, you know. And the UK has some awful record of some 60,000 arrests of gay men who have criminal records. It's amazing. I mean, in India, which had this anti-sodomy law since 1850, we only have like 6 arrests for 150 years, you know. Anyway, so the London was very, there were no photography galleries, you know, it was back to like no photography. People treated photography like a trade. There was some photography schools, so I went to them because I needed a visa. I'd followed this. So I was doing this traveling. I should confess, I was following somebody. I met a guy in my business school in Montreal who turned out to be Swiss. And used to grumble all the time about all the French fries and steaks these people had. So, and how there was no opera or anything. So everyone said, "Why don't you piss off back to Switzerland?" So he threatened to do that. But then I couldn't go unless it was English speaking. And so London was the compromise. So yeah, but he had a job that he went to. I had a terrible year when I first arrived. I had no job to go to. I lived in this flat in Earl's Court where you put money for your heating, coins, you know, and then and they didn't have showers. They had these awful bathtubs on pedestals and very cold. I'd never been so cold in my life. And I came from Canada, you know, it was freezing in London. No heating and hot water running out in the bath and all this. It was a nightmare. And if you spoke to a guy in a gay bar, they wouldn't speak back to you. They were scared, you know. It was really strange. And then, of course, we had arrived as a couple, and you know that doesn't really work because most gay men meet other gay men by sleeping with them. Arriving as some kind of, you know, pseudo-monogamous couple, you don't meet anybody. Nobody would go home with you, and so I didn't really meet anyone. So that was really odd. But then after a year, I had to do something because the immigration people said, we're going to throw you out. So I enrolled in art school. And I did 3 years. And then they said, okay, now you can leave. And I said, no, there's an MA happening as well. Applied for that, got in. And then I did 5 years of art school. And then they said, well, now you can leave. And then I had to leave because in those days, there were no PhDs. So I ended up back in Canada, which was a bit of a shock. And but then I did manage to get back to London, and I thought continue now this life that I thought I wanted, living in London with my Swiss banker, and then everything fell apart. It's one of those things, you know, when you resolve all your small issues in life, the big thing falls apart. I think maybe all the problems kept the relationship going. Once we didn't have any big immigration problem, it didn't seem to work as well. And but then I was stranded in London. You know, then I was like, then I had to stay. I didn't know where to go. So I left with my suitcase and moved in with some lesbians in a squat in North London who also had no heating. So I was back to having no heating, and they had me for security because they thought they might get burgled or something. And they put me in the front room, which was the biggest room, but it had no heating. It was freezing, and it had no curtains. So they wanted to make sure that people could see there was a guy in the house. Some guy lived in that front room. So yeah, to start from scratch like that.
I remember when we did the oral history in 2018, something that you said that really stayed with me. We were talking about clubbing in London in the late 80s, and you were saying that there was this one gay club and you would go and men would be having sex on the dance floor, and then later lesbians started having sex on the dance floor.
Yeah.
And then later, the lesbians and the gay men were having sex. And you said that for a long time you thought that's what queerness was. And I just
that was queer, yeah.
And so then when did you move to Delhi? And what was that move informed by?
I moved in 2005. So in 2003, I turned 50. And I was at a few years before that, I hit a kind of very low point. In 1995, I'd been diagnosed HIV. I'd also split up with somebody else after a number of years. Made the terrible mistake of going off with some very hunky guy who went to the gym every day, but who had no idea about anything else. Anyway, so that was a bad mistake. But anyway, so he said, "Are you positive?" And I said, "No, I don't know. I you know, like, take your chances." And he said, "No, you have to have a test." Anyway, he bugged me about it, so I got a test, and then it came out positive. And then after that, a series of serial things happened, you know, like typically, you know, so guy didn't stay after that, so he went off. Then I'm on my own. Then I stopped going out because you think nobody's going to sleep with you. And then, you know, by then I'm in my mid-40s, and then you feel slightly ill, and then, and then the work was becoming problematic and difficult. And my big cultural project that I'd embarked on, other than being queer, was, of course, race and Black arts and Black photography and Black art. And that was on the wane by the late 90s. You know, we had tried to get something going called Innova, and that had not really worked out so well then. And the YBAs arrived on the scene, and the Tracy Emans took over, using our narratives, you know, being all like, I'm telling my story. But I was thinking, hang on a minute, we just told our story. We just happened to be Black and nobody noticed. Now you white girls are telling your story and everyone's thinking that's marvelous and worth tons of money. Anyway, that's what happened. So I felt very bitter and angry about this. And then I turned 50 and things weren't improving really. So, and something else happens to gay men in their late 40s is that aside from the AIDS fact, the HIV factor, is that my peers, my other gay men, my friend network, were all beginning to look at younger guys. So that no one's looking at you anymore. Everyone's looking at a 20-year-old. And, but you're not old enough to be a daddy. So you're not young enough to be, and you're not old enough to be. So late 40s was a real bloody disaster. I'm warning everybody out there. You're neither here nor there. And so I had this show in Delhi. It was curated by that woman in the blue outfit we just saw. She had said to me, oh, look, India's ready. Delhi's ready to show your work. Because I didn't think they'd want to show gay work, but they did. And she put it on and it was a success. And one of her friends seduced me. Again, it was people-oriented. I mean, literally seduced me. I spent a lifetime avoiding Indian men for sex because they're terrible at it. Nobody teaches them how to do it, you know. So that the whole idea in India is like you ejaculate as fast as possible and leave. You know, don't worry about the other person at all. You know, it's all about self-satisfaction and departure. So I used to avoid them. Anyway, so this very cute guy seduced me, and it turned out he was a healer, and he liked the fact that I was HIV positive. He was going to fix everything. And I thought, how marvelous. So I moved there for him. I have this bad habit of moving countries for people. Anyway, so when I got there, he was no longer interested. Then again, I was sort of a little bit stranded in Delhi, having moved. But before I moved, I threw a big party in London and announced that everybody's homophobic and racist. I'm leaving. And I left. So I thought I can't come back the very next day. So I try and stick it out. So I tried, and then I was very lucky. I met these young people in the pictures, and they adopted me, and I relived my youth. You know, we started a kind of queer liberation, if you like, because what happened to India was that having missed LGBT and gay liberation, this generation was just in time in academia for queer theory. So it came from campus, and then they spread it everywhere. So I honestly, in just a few years, even the Indian media now was saying queer. You know, it just came out of, and then it spread to all the languages, because we have so many languages. They just transcribed the word queer. You know, I'm not sure what they think it means, but now when I go, everybody seems to be queer, and so it's quite interesting what was going on and what happened that way. So yeah, so my 50s after that were great.
Sorry, wasn't 2008 the first year of the Pride March in India as well?
Yeah, so a bunch of people, including a number of people in these pictures, organized the first Pride March. And there was a lot of, this is the first Pride March in Delhi, I must say. I think there have been other parts of India, but whatever happened in Delhi becomes national news because it's the capital. Anyway, so at first, on the day, there was quite a lot of, there were all kinds of rumors that we would be attacked, that there would be, you know, right-wing thugs out there. And when we got there was like just a dozen people, and there were quite a lot of policemen. Like there were twice as many cops as there were people. And then there was a huge amount of media. There were all these television people, you know, wanted to capture this first Pride March, but only 12 people there who were a march. But eventually more people came. And mind you, this is when it was still illegal. So there was that as well. So we were handing out, one of the ideas the group had was to be ready with masks. So people who weren't out or didn't want to be filmed, you know, marching, could wear a mask. So the picture of the head in this series is one of those masks. It came from that. So it's got that history. Oh, there's little Sunil. Okay, so this is the death of Chatterton, by the way. I remember this painting. I don't know if people are familiar with it. It's a well-known Pre-Raphaelite painting. It's actually it's a kind of documentary painting about the death of a real English poet. I don't think, Ksenia, poet's supposed to die young with a glass of wine on the floor.
Telling me. Actually, yeah. How much of the symbolism of the Pre-Raphaelites is in these photographs, or is there a queer symbolism that you added? Like, what's that candle over there? Is that a candle?
Yeah. Yeah, this guy was a very active bottom. And yeah, so I tried to set the scene at first. This one is a close resemblance to the painting, including the light coming from outside and everything. And I shot him like this in this slightly, I guess, passive pose. I mean, this is the pose of the painting, but it's also a very feminine pose in a way for an Indian sort of setup. And he was somebody that I just dated on the internet, not one of the friends and all that. But he became a casual kind of ongoing acquaintance. But this was all part of the very particular Indian situation where there are several hierarchies and divisions and of caste and class and language. And so this guy was basically non-English speaking. So there was only that he couldn't really participate in this activism. I mean, there's that to be said about India, that a lot of this discussion and activism and the law changing, and the law itself, in fact, often it's all happening in English, and thereby excludes quite a lot of people who don't speak English. So the law changed, the year after these pictures were made.
I wanted to spend some time, even though we don't have images of them, but I wanted to spend some time talking about your self-portraiture as well, because you engage in quite a bit of self-portraiture, and those photographs to me really negate this notion of victimhood that is often assumed with HIV positive people. And could you talk a little bit about that process of taking self-portraits, and what are the ways in which it differs or is similar to working with subjects and models?
Yeah, so I think I embarked on this project called From Here to Eternity, again triggered by a grant from Mark Seeley, who could see that I had nothing going on in my life at that point. And up until then, I'd avoided AIDS as subject matter in my own work. I felt I was talking myself into a corner, because I had so many issues, and I kept, every decade there was another issue to add on. Anyway, I decided to do that body of work as a kind of therapy also, because I wasn't well, and I thought I'll shoot my own body to kind of force myself to see the changes that were being brought upon it by the disease. And so I came up with this idea of these diptychs. So you see me in some shape or form on the left, and you see one of my local bars on the right, all of which by then had transformed from drinking clubs into sex clubs, very unremarkably. Nobody said anything. The terrible British tabloids didn't go mad, So London went from being very staid when I arrived to being a place where suddenly everywhere around me, if you went out, you were required to leave your clothes at the front door. So I shot them in the day, so the doors were closed. And I liked the ambiguity, whether they were shutting me in or out, whether they were a prison or whether I was being excluded from something or locked into something. And I think the most difficult one was the first one, where I was naked, and I really hadn't done anything like that before. And it went up on show it was shown very soon after they were made. I remember going into the show when they were hung and nobody was there, and yeah, so there's another one called where I'm a full frontal one, and I just had a slight anxiety attack about what will people think about it actually. But over the years I've gone on and off to the gym, but yeah, that one, and it's just not happening anyway. So then when people did come, and of course my gay friends all said things like, "Oh well, if I was going to take naked selfies, I'd go to the gym more often." I said, "I've been to the bloody gym, but it doesn't do anything for me. I think we Indians just made this way. We have sloping shoulders and all this." And so it kind of became humorous. And I think it made me realize that actually the therapy was working, that the picture of my body on the wall on public display was just a picture. It wasn't me. So I could differentiate between me and the picture of me. And kind of freed me up then. I thought, oh, well, in that case, you can do anything with the body and display it because it's not literally you, It's trickier with other people, of course. So, yeah. So, yeah, I think HIV, one of the consequences for many of us was a lot of kind of self-flagellation around the body because people's bodies changed. People with good bodies ended up with not so good, like very skinny arms and things. And one of the responses to it was to like go to the gym like crazy and build up. And we saw the result of that was like 2,000 half-naked men in discos just dancing all night. Nobody talking. That's what happened. Yeah, in London anyway.
And you co-edited the book Ecstatic Antibodies with Tessa Boffin in 1999.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's a good book. I believe, so here we see the photographs as they are installed in the gallery right now. And I believe that while you were here for this show, you also took new photographs for this body of work. Is that correct?
No, I took new pictures around couples.
Oh, okay.
So I had this other body of work called Lovers 10 Years On, which were mostly portraits of male couples in the mid-80s in London, in West London, a particular social network of people, roughly the same age, the age I was then, in like 30s. So one of those couples, actually there were two women, changed partners, and quite a while ago actually, but because of how I've suddenly been rediscovered of something, those old pictures have come to light. So there was the book, and then the Tate bought some, and more than that, the Tate made a postcard of this particular picture of these two women, and the new partner is very upset about it. So she was saying, she was buying the postcard and sticking her own face on top of the other woman's face and sending that around. And then she used to, whenever I met her, she'd say, "I must take a new picture." So I did finally. No, it's the black and white couple pictures, 10 years on, from the mid-80s, a bit earlier on. So I did a new picture of them more recently. And then again, the same problem. Then you can't have just one picture. How do you show it? You have to have a series. So I embarked on a series. So now the other thing, so then now it's a little different because it's not just me. So I have a collaborator. So Charan, husband, partner, collaborator. We collaborate more and more. So we work on it together, and we're shooting. I started as couples, but the couples aren't always couples. And the couples aren't always gay and lesbian, they're queer, and they're much more diversified and more like what we see in our contemporary life. So yes, we did 6 such pictures in New York, one every day. It was exhausting. Wow. I've had a close-up experience of your subway system carrying equipment up and down the stairs and trying to find places in the depths of Brooklyn. And we did one in Philadelphia. with people that I've known a very long time, since the 80s. And I'd never shot them. It's really weird, but of course they shoot themselves. One of them is a photographer like me, and she's made a wonderful book about their whole relationship. So, but now they've entered into this series, and so the plan is to keep going, and they're in color to differentiate. And then the people are all kinds of ages. So obviously my friends are now all in their 70s, and then a lot of people are young and still like just coming out of school and things. So I found it very invigorating to be intergenerational in that sense, since my daily experience. So when I came to London, I did a bit of teaching, and I basically made it my business to get to know emerging cohorts from both from studio practice, but also from art history. And so we hang out with them a bit, and use our home like that. And it's nice to have to meet people who are not all feeling bitter and twisted about the last 70 years, who feel young and hopeful.
I'm not sure if I qualify, but yeah, your work is, so much of your work is both a personal and a collective archive that is very intergenerational, and yeah, it's really beautiful. I have more questions that I can ask, but since the slideshow went away, I wonder if
Go for it.
it's time to
Okay. We ran out of.
There's oh, okay. I know I should have. There's so much more to talk about, but one of the things that I did want to ask you, and actually I have the book, so this is, we're gonna do it the analog way, but in many of the photographs, particularly the series where in India, where many of the subjects are, you can't see the face, they're turned away from the camera, obviously, because they don't want to be outed, and I wonder, in those photographs, maybe I should keep it up so that we can really look at them, what role does, because we've talked about the subject and the models, but then what role does the landscape and the surrounding play?
Oh, okay. So those particular pictures, yeah, they're all sites of not only of cruising, so we needed to see the area, but also these sites in India are historic places and gardens of Mughal tombs, which were the subject of 19th century photography. So if you go anywhere and look at 19th century photography of India, you get pictures of these buildings, but apparently with no people around them. So I was wanting to bring that little reference from art history or photo history of how people have shot these spaces, and to introduce into it a more contemporary idea of what goes on. One of the many things that go on there is gay cruising. And that was interesting because that double spread on the left, it's being reenacted, the man with the legs. The men at the lake, though, is a documentary picture. That wasn't a setup. So my initial interest in photography was documentary, and so I really liked the style and the look of it, and the transparency of it, and the ease with which people can find it acceptable. So those are the two ways in which I've worked: slightly documentary and slightly set up documentary. Yeah. Except the Pre-Raphaelite, which are, of course, entirely set up.
Do you imagine ever showing the Pre-Raphaelite series with the paintings?
There have been they were shown in Aberdeen at the museum, which has a number of the originals. And but they didn't show them like with the paintings, they just showed the photographs, but they created elaborate wall text with an image of the painting.
Yeah. I guess it would be difficult with everything.
And then this summer, there was a big Rossetti show at the Tate. And at the end of it were two or three modern or contemporary responses. And so one of these works was the very last image in the show before you walked out, that couple kissing. It was about The Kiss by Rossetti. So that was the last image of the two guys that was in our slideshow. And that was quite interesting because you'd seen all of these paintings, and then that's the last image you leave with, and it was on its own on this big wall, so in that museum-like way. And if you stood in a certain spot, you could hear me talk about it. So it was quite grand, I thought, anyway, because they'd never been treated like that before. So.
Sunil, thank you so much. I'm gonna wind down also because I believe my Wi-Fi is a little spotty. I hope everyone could follow all of that.
Yeah, your voice is very clear, no problem. Yeah.
Good. And I imagine that some people in the audience will have questions for you as well, but thank you so much. And, I can't wait for our next conversation.
Okay, great.
Wow. Thank you so much, Ksenia and Sunil, for that conversation. That was such a pleasure to listen to. I encourage everyone who's here today to post your questions in the chat if you have them. The first question today is going to be from my colleague, Eleanor. Eleanor, feel free to unmute and ask.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you so much, Ksenia and Sunil. This has been absolutely just incredible. I'm super grateful to you both. Sunil, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how it felt to revisit this body of work after so much time has passed, I guess. What is it, 15 years or so since 2008, and if you felt differently about it, if you feel that it was maybe received or portrayed differently in any ways, and kind of related to that, or maybe it's actually not related, but I'm curious. I really love how you work within photography with those two frameworks of documentary and set, and I'm wondering if you feel that having a more documentary style would work for this body of work. Like if you were to, for example, extend it into today, would you do it any differently?
Well, that's interesting because, first of all, 2008 or 7-8 feels like yesterday to me. So it's nearly my present. I don't feel that distant from it. And maybe the COVID years kind of did that. There's a kind of funny way in which time got warped a bit. So, yes, I think in a way, the urgency of the moment of 2008, which was to change the law, that has passed. That's true. So it was done in that activist kind of spirit. And something I've always said, and when we did ecstatic antibodies together that Ksenia just mentioned, Tessa and I, it was born in an AIDS meeting in London where we were the only people who said we want to do an art show. Everybody else said we need to lie down in front of the buses and stop the traffic in the banking district. And basically they were saying that art shows were bourgeois nonsense and nobody saw them anyway, which was kind of true. But then I think that it's not that people see them, but it's the response to them. So that can have a big impact. So that's kind of what happened with this project, is that I don't think many people saw it. It was in an art gallery. Not many Indians go to art galleries, but the media picked it up. because of the nature of the subject matter and because of the debate around the law. And suddenly I was like on TV, I was on magazine covers, the work was on magazine covers. Maybe that's a slide I should have shared earlier. I forgot the context of it. So it got a lot of exposure. It was shown in India like I intended. There was only some images which the gallery took out, partly because of this other nature of photography, is that it's too close to, as a medium, it's way too close to pornography. You know, so had it been painting or sculpture, naked bodies are fine, but when it's photography, it's a different ball game. And so some pictures were deemed unshowable in India. Actually, what I found is that some pictures are deemed unshowable in the West. So it does vary by culture. There's no like single answer. So one of my responses to you is that everything seems to be in a kind of flux, depending on where you are in time and place, and you're allowed to do certain kinds of things now in New York, which you may not do in some other places, or at some other times in New York, kind of thing. I basically emerged at a time when people whispered about Robert Mapplethorpe, and when he had the first show in London, the pictures were smuggled in the US diplomatic bag, couldn't come through normal customs, they would have burnt them. And then when they were hung up at the ICA, they had curtains in front of them. So you actually approached them and like, you know, there was all of this going on. It was so, and when I mentioned homosexuals in my art school, they said, shush, everybody's underage. But the age of consent was 21 in the UK, and everybody was 18. And my school said, you cannot do this in the classroom. It's illegal. It's criminal offense. You know, so, and what we are seeing now is that in a lot of places in Europe, and also to some extent in the States, I guess, there's a rollback. People want to change the law, go backwards, you know, make various things illegal. I was in Miami for Art Basel a couple of years ago, thanks to the gallery. And that's when they were doing all that don't say gay business. I was quite shocked. I said, we're in Miami Beach and they're saying don't say gay. Are they crazy? Everybody looks totally gay. How can they say don't say gay? But they were really serious about it, you know. So it doesn't take much to like change the law. We saw this in India, you know, it became legal in 2009. It became illegal again in 2013 and became legal again in 2018. Who's to say when it, you know, when is it going to be the final, you know? So people always have to kind of be aware. I think I meandered completely away from your question by now. Sorry.
No, that was amazing. Thank you, Sunil.
Thank you, Eleanor, for that question, and thank you, Sunil. The next question is going to be from Lynn Crawford. Lynn, I'll ask on your behalf. Lynn is wondering if you have any beloved literature, Sunil, poets or novels that impact you in your work.
Yes, my first love was literature, because as I said, I didn't grow up with art and painting and all that. And reading was the thing. If photography hadn't happened, I think I would have been very drawn to reading and writing. And I like to read fiction, but I hate reading his art theory, which I've had to do all my life. Anyway, so I go to novels and short stories. And my favorites have changed over time. I have a tendency to just get completely taken in by one person. So yeah, one of my favorite persons of all time is Alice Munro. Not because she's Canadian, of course she is Canadian, so I can really picture what she's talking about. All that rural Ontario stuff, I kind of vaguely grew up with it. And I love the little twists in her plots. And I grew up reading, you know, I have terrible memory for names. This is a bad question for me. I have to at this point. Who was that Catholic writer who wrote all those wonderful stories from the South? Woman, Carson McCullers. Is it Carson McCullers? Am I thinking that's right?
Lonely Hunter.
Hmm?
The Heart is a Lonely Hunter.
Yeah, she wrote these stories about growing up, but young girls in the South. I'll never forget, there was a story about a traveling salesman, so this woman, this young woman, had a false leg, and she'd come to visit her family in the deep South. She'd escaped to New York, but she'd come back to visit them, and then this traveling salesman came by, and they had sex in the barn upstairs, up a ladder. And then the guy opened his briefcase, he was carrying his briefcase or whatever, and he popped her false leg into it and left her on top of the barn, legless, literally, unable to come down. That was the story. I mean, that kind of thing, it really captures my imagination. In fact, I'm reading one now by an Irish woman who's fantastic also. I have to look at it. Is it here? No, it's gone to the bedroom. Anyway, not a short story writer, but she writes very short novels. I can run over and get it if you want me to. Shall I? Okay, hang on, let me get it. It's
The anticipation, oh my God.
Oh yeah, there it is. Sorry about that. She's called Claire Keegan. And this particular little book is called Antarctica. The book's been out a few years. I just got it. It's short stories. Claire Keegan, I think she's Irish, Ireland-based. And anyway, these short stories, they're only like 3 or 4 pages long. They'll make your hair stand on end. I just love the way the language is being used. And how little it takes to move from sentence to sentence, and there are only a few in a paragraph. And it's so descriptive, it just takes you into a whole place. I feel it inspires the photography for me. Try to find a shorthand to, because you only have one picture sometimes, and you have to say a lot with it. Yeah. I find it very relaxing and inspiring at the same time.
Wow, thank you so much for that incredibly generative question, Lynn, and thank you for your response, Sunil. If we have no more questions today, I just want to say a huge, huge thank you again to Sunil and Ksenia for today's dialogue, and a very big thank you to all of you for those very thoughtful questions. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our Poet Laureate of the Day, Teline Trần, to the stage. Teline Trần is a writer from Orange, California, or Gabrielino Tongva land. They write about home and interstitial faith via several mediums, such as fiction, poetry, film, and ultimately the browser. Teline works as the membership and community engagement coordinator at Wendy's Subway, a reading room, writing space, and independent publisher in Bushwick, Brooklyn. They are also the development coordinator at Mekong NYC, a Southeast Asian grassroots organization in the Bronx. Their work appears in No Dear Magazine, Mono No Aware, The Poetry Project, Diacritics, and elsewhere. Teline's first poetry chapbook is Ad Hoc. Welcome, Teline.
Hi, thank you, Sunil and Ksenia, for such an engaging dialogue and for the Brooklyn Rail for the invitation today. I have 4 poems And this first one is called Part 2. I'm a girl who can hold a rifle. May it be funny because it's the last resort. May it speak numbers because history has bubbled into a shock that sends waves home, a message to say to come out and play. This power makes us drool. I can feed you like that and also like that. Don't I look beautiful? Don't I print well? Could you see me on the farm? Could you see me with our children? Could you see me with a pitchfork in the shape of your name? I'm a girl who can hold a will. I'm a girl you want to touch. It's not right to look. It's not right to be. My problems aren't just because of them. I can take matter into my own hands. Get in the pit. In the name of stone fruit, pit rolled of secrets to whisper into a hole of divine memory, safe in the hearts of stranger gaps of time. Pack it tightly in spirals of anchovies for breakfast, described as if your tongue were sheltering a round pebble. Maps and keys travel in tubes across the Atlantic. Bundle your torso so as not to spill that all inside out. I'm no longer today, spending evenings flattened then to rise. We'll pull down those barriers to flood into the river and scream. Single file lines hold the small of your back to front again, inverse infection, replicating along the terms of an unborn national grit. In the water, you feel not small, but unembodied. If that is embryonic, then the most perfect light is behind your eyelids suspended in salt. Leave the night covered in bruises from strangers you love. Part 1 of the web was never untangled, though we found the loops to stick our thumbs inside. A cat's cradle, a not here, not there, not plain, not close, not incognito, not one, not two, not spectrum, not divisive, not insurrectionist, not illustrated, not writhing, not meek, not rewarded, not calm, not. When a plane drops pesticides, they take a fog-shaped deluge and revelation. When tear gas rims the lungs of my friend's heart, they stop shedding their eggs. 2 generations later, he'd still be born without 4 limbs crawling on. A state can't pay for what a state can't prove. What a state might hold is more than class action. Hurricane. This evening, I draw the hurricane inside out. Hard water thickens my scalp, and 1971 plays a trick on the rain. Is it 1970 or 1971? One sounds a lot more innocent. I had run my hair under it, outside, scraping the sides of my bumper hours earlier. To look out the window is to sense tail riding. I have empathy for weakening storms, storms that stalk the worst to mark their allegiances. To play into a hurricane is not letting it wind. No, to play into a hurricane is to overflow thy cup and declare no winners, no survivors. How to tie a jeweler's knot. To mend an ending is not to have a final fantasy or a marred tongue or a scab flaking into irreversible flood. I'll listen to advice of those in love with the porous nerves my girl gifted to me. Hold jealousy in the hips so your shorty may grasp your love handles, to wring your lungs so dry you wheeze, even before the pull of a hookah pen minted in battery acid. Tie a loophole from memory for a crop we can't stop fucking over and over, for excellence, for looking so deep underwater. Clean, drink, close-lipped smile, dribbling like you mean it. I mean all that I say. I am still practicing being a good liar, a good man, an orifice for your wishes to drop in. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Teline. That was really, really beautiful and such a wonderful way to end this program today. Thank you for reading. And thank you as well again to Sunil and to Ksenia for today's conversation. Thank you to Matea, Stuart, and Maria at Hales, who were so helpful in preparing for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor our NSE program and make daily conversations like this one possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. For 23 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our free monthly publication and public events like this one, our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate to support our work at the Rail. And if you're free on Monday at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with Steve DiBenedetto and Dan Nadel on the occasion of Uncertainty Takes a Holiday at David Nolan Gallery. We conclude with a poetry reading by James Sherry. And as is Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ksenia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
so much.
Sunil.
Beautiful
Thanks,
reading.
Ksenia.
Thank you. Great.
Amazing.
Good talk. Thank you,
Wonderful.
Sunil.
So much.
Thanks for your reading.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ksenia. Thank you, you guys. Thank you,
Bye.
Teline.
Thank you.
So much.
For the beautiful reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Have
you
a
so
great
much.
weekend.
Have a good weekend,
Also,
everyone.
Okay.
Go see the show,
Bye.
everybody. Congratulations on the show, Sunil.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Greetings.
thank you so
Go
much.
see the show.